Emily Fletcher, I am so excited to talk with you today. It's kind of like a reunion, right?
Yeah, long time reunion.
Long
It's just,
time.
just a simple decade has passed,
I know,
but reunited and it
exactly.
feels so good.
And talking about the best stuff, because we both actually learnt to meditate around the same time. We actually met in an acting course where I believe it was that same year that we both learnt to meditate with the same teacher. And then since then, we've both gravitated towards teaching the wonderful gifts that we've gained from meditation, which I
Mm.
suppose happens to many of us when we see the beautiful benefits that come. But you have really gone on to change the world with it, dialing up the volume around Vedic meditation and Vedic wisdom. And I just so love watching you in your genius. So
Mm.
while I was meditating this morning, at the very end of my practice, I had this sense to actually start this chat with you, not where I wanted to necessarily start, but with a question to you about what you want to share right now, what you feel needs to be heard.
That's a great one. So I'm really interested in this idea that suffering is optional. That meaning one of my missions at Ziva is to eradicate the world from unnecessary suffering, right? And I get that some suffering is part of the human experience. People die, there is sickness. Yes, we're in a pandemic, but so much of what people are suffering from right now is in fact optional. It is in fact unnecessary. Yes, we're in a trying time globally, but you get to choose, right? Like you get to choose which tools you invest in. You get to choose which tools you practice. You get to choose what questions you ask yourself. You get to choose what people you spend your time with. You get to choose whether or not you're going to spend an hour scrolling through Instagram or an hour at the gym working out. So even though I know that if people are suffering from chronic or inherited alcoholism or depression, there really are ways to transform. And I think, like you
Mm-hmm.
were saying, you find these tools and they help so much and you want to just share them with the world. But I'm going through, so I'm home right now. My mom had a stroke 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
I'm here
sorry.
taking care of her. I have my toddler. We're in a pandemic. I'm going through a massive life change
Wow.
and I'm happier than I've ever been.
Right.
So it's like I can play all the victim cards right now. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I have extraordinary privilege and I'm in an extraordinarily challenging time and I'm happier than I've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not an accident, right? That's a return on investment. That's because I've spent the last 12 years 45 minutes a day in meditation and then all of the great decisions that come as a byproduct of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just this idea of it's very popular to suffer right now. And because it's like, it's like the flavor, oh, this year, oh, this election, oh, this pandemic, it's like popular to suffer. And it's easy to find low grade unity with people in the suffering. And I would just challenge us all to do the work to up level ourselves energetically. And there might not be as wide of a group of people to find unity with, but it will be a much higher quality unity because you're looking at what's going right. What
Mm-hmm.
flowers can I be watering instead of which weeds?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that it's a more fun way to live, and why not?
100%. And it's so incredible. That's kind of, I suppose, why I had this insight to ask you what you wanted to share, because so many of the things that you raised just then were on my list of touch points with you. So we'll cover all of that in greater detail. But I suppose because you're talking about this popularity of suffering and where we're getting it all from, and a lot of it is being passed between us, from what we're consuming and who we're surrounded by, and then we're almost picking up on each other's vibrations if we don't have the tools to stay in our own. So I thought I would kind of catch you up as to what's in fact prompted this reunion between you and I, because I'm talking to a lot of light workers like yourself, and you'll be learning this live at the same time as everybody who's listening to this. So before I started coaching and teaching, after I studied cognitive psychology and acting, which is where we met in an acting class, a comedy acting class, I became a
Mm-hmm.
journalist. Again, I wanted to tell people stories. I was so interested in the human condition, what makes us the way we are. And I went that route through journalism. And I simply used my meditation as my superpower, I suppose, helping me do my job better, which it absolutely did when you're fielding all of these different streams of information and it's a deadline driven, high pressure environment. But then also feeling connected to something more when I found myself watching and talking about doom and gloom every day and asking myself, why are we doing this whole thing of life if everyone is just so sad all the time, if there's so much suffering, right? Now, that, of course, is a side effect of the lens I was looking through every day, looking at the death and destruction every day, being a mouthpiece for it, and then how I was looking through that lens, right? So when I left my job as a news anchor, I knew I wanted to tell different stories about the world. There's a different lens through which we can look at and different things that we can look at to still understand it. And I wanted to bring hope at this time of deep division and fear, and to interview people like you who can help us find a way towards each other. How can we facilitate looking at the world where we can feel informed? We don't have to bury our head in the sand. We must look at the earthly events, but then still feel empowered. And you're very much into healing the world one meditator at a time. Saving the world, though, a mammoth task. And you're going one person at a time, because we can do it right here at home. Start with us as individuals, which is how Home of Sapiens was born. So since you're this vessel filled with so much wisdom and Vedic knowledge and scientific principles, which I know is the basis for your book, how have you discovered, or what have you discovered, that helps us better relate to the world around us without getting absolutely pummeled by it?
Thank you so much for sharing your journey and for asking such a beautiful and important question, because it's really tempting to go one of two directions right now. It's tempting to just get addicted to the doom scrolling and, you know, refreshing your news feed every 15 minutes. Is the election over? Is the election over? What's happening? Like, and you know, we get addicted to the stress chemicals just like we get addicted to anything else. So your adrenaline and cortisol levels get to a certain point, and then you need even crazier news. You need to get it more often in order to get that hit of adrenaline and cortisol. And I think that we as adults have convinced ourselves that somehow like to worry is to be responsible, right? Of like, well, if I'm worried about money, then I'm really being a good, responsible adult. And it's like, when did we decide that? Like, it's just a boogeyman in the closet, like every other fear. You know, it's dirty paper that we put energetic assignment on. And so I think that this idea of like, well, I have to worry, I have to constantly be concerned, that's one rabbit hole we can go down. And then the other really tempting rabbit hole, as the news cycle gets more and more intense, as things get more and more divisive, as like foreign entities that I'm not sure are like really funneling a lot of energy and seemingly money into conspiracy theories that are very divisive, the other alternative that people are choosing is, well, I'm too spiritual for this, or I'm just going to put my head in the sand. I don't like news. I don't like politics. I don't want to talk religion. Let's just talk about Kim Kardashian's new eyeshadow line or whatever, or this celebrity who lost 15 pounds, or, you know what I mean? Like stuff that doesn't mean anything to you or anyone else. And so I think that we as meditators, certainly, but as the conscious humans on the planet, have a responsibility to walk this line, right? Of yes, we need to look at what's happening on planet Earth, and we have to feel good, and we have to be able to be self-sufficient for our own happiness. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to help contribute to the solutions of those problems, right? Like, let's say you wanted to go and volunteer at a soup kitchen, right? You're like, there's homeless people in my town. I want to go and volunteer. You know, seems really altruistic, seems really awesome. Okay, great, you're a part of the solution. But if you then were to get really sick, or to be having an anxiety attack, or to be like raging and losing your temper, and go into that soup kitchen and you're spreading your sickness and your fear and your rage to everyone, then you are not a part of the solution, right? You're actually making it worse. And I think that that's the same thing that we're doing, even if you're not actively, tangibly interacting with some sort of a challenge. Energetically, if you are giving your attention to a certain candidate, if you're giving your attention to a certain organization, like that is watering the weeds. Right. So what we put our attention on grows. And we're in this social media age, we're seeing that. I mean, we're literally quantifying and monetizing where we put our eyeballs. And so what you put your attention on grows. The longer you look at an ad, the longer you stay on a web page, where everybody's logging all of that. And we're monetizing it, buying ads across it, you know, making email funnels around it. And so what you put your attention on grows. And it's very literal right now, because what you like, what you click, what you look at, you're going to start getting fed more of that in your social media feed. Okay, so it's like more important than ever. This is not just an energetic woo-woo concept. This is actually happening in your digital world.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to take care that we are curating and cultivating the information that we are ingesting through our eyes as much as we would be curating what we put in our mouths,
Mm.
right? Like you're not going to eat garbage all day and expect to feel good. You eat Twinkies for breakfast, lunch, and dinner,
Right.
you're going to feel awful.
But how do you
Same thing. If
identify
you're,
what that
Mhm.
garbage is? Because obviously people watch what makes them, what almost backs up what they already believe, right? We watch the
Yeah.
channels that seem to support our existing beliefs. How do we know what's garbage? How do we filter that?
Well, I would recommend just stopping, like for a minute. Like if you feel like you're addicted to the news, like I would take like I would stop cold turkey for like a minute. And by a minute, I mean like maybe a month. And then just see what happens. Like if you don't watch the news for 1 month of your life, see if anything in the world changes for the better or the worse. Do you know what I mean? Like that, like here's
Yeah.
the news flash. It's not going to matter
Mm-hmm.
whether or not you're stressing yourself out or poisoning yourself or making yourself sick.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to matter with the world situations. The only thing that's going to get changed is your life for the better. So I would say like hard stop, like fat, like stop it cold turkey, see what changes inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
Then once you even can hear your own intuition or decide what you think and feel about something, then you could curate and cultivate like, oh, this is something that makes me feel good. And I would recommend checking in with your body. Watch something, like see how you feel, like, right, even like journal it, like a news journal, just like you would a drug or a drinking or something. Like I feel good, I watched 10 minutes of X and now I feel better or worse. You know, you could even be like better, worse column.
Mm-hmm.
News made me feel better or worse, better or worse, better or worse. And if it's constantly worse,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I mean, I am biased in that I don't really watch the news. Which I know sounds irresponsible. I do keep up with things, but mostly from humans who I very much trust and curate and select. And I'll listen to podcasts. And if I did decide to ingest the news, I would usually do it reading, not watching TV, because TV has to be sensationalist by definition, right? But if you're reading it, it's usually a little bit more distilled, and I try and go as neutral as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I would do it like our mutual teacher, he has a thing, he says, read the newspaper like once a year. And then ask yourself the question, what's the most pressing need of the time? And for you, it might be climate change, or it might be something more local. It might be like, well, we need a compost in my neighborhood. What's the most pressing need of the time? And then we ask the question, how do my gifts best serve that need? Right? So what's the most pressing need of the time? How do my gifts best serve that need? Which of these gifts do I want to use?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Will it bring me joy to continue to stay in journalism? Would it bring me joy to continue acting? Would it bring me joy to teach meditation? Right? So you've chosen, this is the thing that brings me joy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's going to make a difference in the world. And then the last question is, which of those gifts can I use, do I want to use right now? Right? So I knew I was going to be a meditation teacher for a long time, but I just thought it would be way later when I'm done
Mm-hmm.
on Broadway, when I'm done singing, when I'm done dancing. And it sort of decided for me. But it's 4-question framework. And I have a link to a video on this if you want to include it in the show notes. But it's
Yes.
basically, what's the most pressing need of the time? How do my gifts best serve that need? Which of those gifts do I want to use? And then right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get to a pretty clear Venn diagram. And if you're meditating plus doing that thing, I would call this the conscious design of happiness, right? Because you're filling up your own cup, you're managing your own nervous system, and then you're contributing it to things that feel important to you. And the cool thing here is that what's most pressing to you is going to be different than what's pressing to me. Our skill sets are different, our gifts are different. So we're going to solve them in our own unique ways.
Right. And I can totally attest to that, because as a meditator, I could tell as I was watching what was happening in the world, I was seeing, well, what we're talking about is effectively a manifestation of how we're feeling as individuals. We're feeling afraid, we're feeling sad, we're feeling divided. And this just felt like this ugly cycle that I didn't want to be a part of that conversation. And I'll tell you, I haven't watched the news in a year, and I know everything you need to know. And I still can tell that this is, for me, the most pressing need of the time, is to find, for us to feel, as you say, to be guided towards our own inner compass and say, how can I best serve? How can I best help lift the collective to a place where we're feeling more connected? We don't want to feel divided. It doesn't feel good, as you say, when you measure, just exactly as you say, is it making me feel better or not? So that is my question. The divisiveness requires a me and a you, and I'm right and you're wrong, and a holding on to our beliefs, and a separateness. And you have talked many times about the fact that we are at the same time all one. You'll say it much better. while, you know, while we are individuals, at the same time, we're all one. So talk us through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's one of the reasons why I love meditation so much, and specifically this style of meditation, is that it's not celebrating just the unmanifest. It's not celebrating just the divine. It's not celebrating just the unity. It's also celebrating the individual and the humanity. And so if you look at a human brain, it splits right down the middle, 50-50, 50% left brain, 50% right. And I don't think that's an accident, right? I don't think nature would have given us 50-50 if it wanted us to use 90-10. So the way I like to think about it is that it's 50% human and 50% divine. 50% individuality, 50% totality, but both are happening simultaneously. And the quote that I love to say is that there's only one thing and we're all it. And that one thing is energy, right? And we've now proven that on a scientific level. It's like we've got with the quark and the leptoquark, and now we have the Higgs boson particle, which is the smallest thing that we can detect. Mm-hmm. And it's really just a wave. And so the analogy that comes from the Vedas is there's only one thing and we're all it, and that one thing is energy. And we use the analogies that we're all different waves on this giant ocean of energy, right? And so I'm the wave that looks like Emily and you're the wave that looks like Tracy. But at the end of the day, if you de-excite the nervous system, if you access that source energy, you come back to the animating force that is inside of all of us, the animating force that makes us all alive. Mm-hmm. And so when you're meditating, you're actually practicing dying. You're moving beyond the left brain. You're moving beyond the individuality and tapping into that totality. You're tapping into the very thing that lives on beyond the death of the body. And once you access that thing, it doesn't go away at the end of the meditation, right? You keep that with you throughout the rest of your day. So even though, yes, I'm Emily Fletcher in Florida at my mom's house wearing a maroon shirt, there's a piece of me that's very much connected to the divine. And that's something that a muscle that I've been exercising every day for 12 years. And so I think a lot of people think that with meditation, it's just about what happens in the sitting. Right? Oh, well, did I feel good or not for those 15 minutes? Did I have a lot of thoughts or not? Like, was that thing good? Mm-hmm. But just like we don't exercise for the joy of being on a treadmill for 20 minutes, you exercise so that you have better color in your cheeks and better cardiovascular health, and you're happier and you are stronger. Like, that's why you run, not because you really love the 45 minutes on the treadmill. So same thing with meditation. It's not about what's happening in the sitting. It's about how connected are you? How resilient are you? How present are you? How intuitive are you in the rest of your life?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's often why people stop meditating, because they start because they want to have a particular result. They want to feel a particular way, and it's not feeling the way that I suppose people have been misled to think it's supposed to be. And as I say to people, if you want to run a marathon, you have to put your sneakers on and run every day, right? If you want, the same way, if you want the benefits of meditation, you have to meditate every day to get the benefits, the outside of meditation, right? But then I want to take it a little step further, because I suppose this is a sticky point in the we are all one. If I am you and you are me, how do we contend with the things we complain about? How do we contend with the fact that I am ISIS, I'm a murderer, I am a rapist, I'm a bully, and so are you? How do you kind of package that one?
Well, it's just so interesting that you started with ISIS, because ISIS is coming in so strong for me right now, but not the terrorist organization, but the Egyptian goddess Isis, the goddess of pleasure and the goddess of feminine empowerment, and not creator, but like one of the masters of sex magic. And so, it's so interesting that here's this beautiful, like one of the strongest divine feminine characters in the entire anthology of any civilization's mythology. And yet that name has been co-opted for a terrorist organization. So it's like even that word ISIS can bring on fear and separateness and division, or it can bring on like, oh, I deserve my own pleasure. I am God pretending to be human. Same word. Yeah. Right. And so just like that, like even a murderer, even a pedophile, even, whoever the F is running QAnon, like I'm sure that they have good pieces in them.
Yeah.
Right. Like there are things in them that think that they're doing what's right. I really do believe that we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we have. Mm-hmm. Now, it's possible that those individuals had brain damage, or their moms were very stressed when they were pregnant, or were on drugs, or they had an extreme amount of trauma when they were children. And there's been a level of things that have happened to them that are making them act out in ways that are creating harm. But I very much believe that there is no such thing as good or bad. There's no such thing as right or wrong. There is only creation, maintenance, and destruction. And so anywhere that we see destruction, it's like, well, what creation can come right behind it?
Right.
And oftentimes that is our job as meditators, is to bring the innovation, right? Because if you're tapping into the divine every day, twice a day, it's like your right brain, you're tuning your antenna to the frequency of creativity. And oftentimes it is that creative energy, that innovation, that's going to allow you to transition from the destruction into creation. But I just found this quote. My coach, Lauren Zander from Hendel Group, she's like, you can't get to your higher self until you deal with your lower self. And 54% of American white women just voted for Trump, right? And a lot of those are like spiritual white women. And so it's an interesting thing of like, well, we all believe that we're good people, right? And we all subscribe to a certain thing, right? Like even like any good actor will tell you, if you're playing a villain, the villain doesn't know that they're the villain. The villain thinks that they're the hero. Right. And so we have to understand, like, what about this villain that we've vilified, like what's their heroic mission? Right. And I think, and if we get honest with ourselves and say, like, where am I being a villain right now? In whose story am I the villain? We can start to really clean up our lives. We can clean up the ways we deny things to ourselves, the ways that we manipulate other people, because it's in all of us. And the more you deal with the darkness, the more you're going to have space for the light.
Oh, it's such a messy one, especially, here I'm working in the Middle East, right? Which is this tit for tat story that has been going on, and who has the moral, high ground here, and when you talk about this, coming back to how can I contend with that I am ISIS and you are ISIS, etc. And you talked about the destruction element to allow for creation. I suppose that then if we are all one, I require that destruction element to come in for the creation. It might awaken in me to, as you say, connect to being the solution, or to bring that unity, as opposed to, I don't know, because there's obviously a purpose for the destruction element, right?
Well, I mean, I hope so. I choose to believe that there is.
Yeah.
I choose to believe that if things are showing up, then yes, there is a reason and a purpose. I don't know if that's true or not, but I enjoy my life more when I choose to believe that. And so I'm choosing to believe it. But I think that in that particular, in the Middle East, and I'm nobody's Middle Eastern, expert, but it does, like the tit for tat, I'm right, you're right, it's my land, it's your land, this God is my God, this God is my God. It's very patriarchal, that whole system, right? It's like, even there's like a level of patriarchy baked into the entire Judeo-Christian and even Islamic faith, right? It's very masculine, actually. And so if we go back to ISIS, if we go back to like this rising of the divine feminine, like, I think that the best creators, right, are able to destroy, but not using destruction operator energy, right? Like, here's a better example. Reese Witherspoon. Yes, we just went from conflict in the Middle East to Reese Witherspoon. Please stay with me. Reese Witherspoon, like, recognized that there was an issue in Hollywood, that women over 40 weren't getting jobs. There weren't the kind of roles that she wanted to see about women. There weren't enough female directors, female producers. So instead of going in and fighting the system and breaking down the patriarchal movie studio industry that had been in place for a century, she just created her own. She's like, no, I'm just going to make my own production company. I'm going to produce the films that I want to see made. I'm going to hire the directors that I want to see hired. And she started empowering women. So she didn't try and destroy the film industry. She created a whole new ecosystem.
Right.
A book club that's now like on par with Oprah's book club. And to me, that, I mean, this is just kind of, I'm riffing right now, but it seems like in the Middle East, we need to not buy into this tit for tat, I'm right, you're right, who has the higher ground, but instead like create a whole new system, a whole new divinely feminine, not female necessarily, but feminine, back to nature, back to honoring the earth, back to honoring the cycles, back to realizing that none of us own any land, that God is in all of us, which almost every religion says that God is omnipresent, omnipotent, and what's the other omni? There's 3 omnis, but basically at the end of the day, it's omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent. So everywhere in everything.
Okay.
Right? And if that's true, then that means that God's inside of me and you and every member of ISIS and every member of the Taliban and every person that lives in Tel Aviv and every person that lives in the Gaza Strip and every person, like everywhere, it's all God.
And it's
It's
calling for
all
us to
God.
do something different, which is why, I mean, beyond just the who's owns what, in terms of, you know, my brother, you killed my brother, you killed my sister. We have personal grief, you know, from you know, as an outcome of this conflict. But it's causing us and forcing us, as you say, to go into that feminine energy of healing, of how can we do things differently. And the way I'm looking at the world at the moment is, you know, and it's talked about also in the way that Vedic wisdom is kind of distilled. When we want to get rid of something, like when you delete something off your computer, right? You have to highlight it first before you delete it. And when you look at all of this stuff that's coming up, healing is messy. Healing doesn't look like, oh, yay, hooray, we went step by step by step and it looks perfect. It's painful, it's icky. We see all of the worst parts that have to come up first. And I feel like a big healing is happening and we're being forced to go, hang on a minute, this isn't working. And now we have to start looking at the parts that weren't. And as you say, uh, you know, adopting a much more feminine approach, which is much softer and letting go and more attached. But
And
to that,
honoring nature and like looking to nature.
completely, and being in flow with that. And then to that though as well, there's a lot of well-intentioned content out there that's telling us as well that, you know, to be happy all the time, right? This is what the goal is. And I believe that it's also subconsciously, and when it comes to healing, this is what's brought me to this, it's subconsciously telling us to banish emotions like sadness, shame, anger, grief. What's your take on that?
So it's so fascinating. I just did a live stream yesterday. So every Tuesday we do like a Ziva global meditation. And yesterday, and I'll do a lecture as well. And yesterday's topic was feeling your feelings and really giving yourself full permission to be exactly where you are. And I think that a lot of people are confusing the term bliss with happiness. So happiness is just one spectrum on the emotional rainbow. But bliss can be everywhere all the time. Meaning that it's like a background, right? And the more we experience bliss, the more it frees us up to feel the entire spectrum of human emotions. But if you don't have access to that bliss, then likely you're going to try and protect yourself from the pain and just be like, well, I'm just going to be happy. I'm just going to not deal with that. And then we repress and we manipulate and we cover up. Versus if you know you have access to your own bliss and fulfillment, you know you can, you know, create dopamine and serotonin reliably, sustainably, and in a self-sufficient fashion in your body every day, twice a day, then it's not as scary to feel sad. It's not as scary to feel angry. It's like you feel it fully, and then you move through to the new now, right? It's not that meditators don't feel, it's that meditators feel faster and then they move through to the new now. And happiness, again, it's one color on the rainbow, and a rainbow is much more exciting than just one color.
So then what does then a healthy relationship with the darker, more shadow emotions and part of ourselves look like?
I think that I think it's not being afraid of them. I think it's like looking them in the face. I think it's giving yourself permission to actually feel your feelings when they come. You know, I have a 2-year-old son and I watch him. Like 2-year-olds, their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. And so they don't really have the ability to regulate their emotions. And so if he gets angry, he's just fully angry. And, you know, we call it like the terrible twos. It's not terrible for them. It's terrible for us as adults who are trying to control them or change them somehow. But if they just sit with him and just let him be angry or let him cry, it's usually like 5 to 7 minutes that he rages, and then he's fine. And so because we as adults have such a hard time sitting for 5 minutes with someone crying or being angry because it makes us uncomfortable, then we go to everything. Well, have a bottle, have a cookie, let me change your diaper, here's this toy. And then we're looking to all these external solutions to solve what's really an internal release. And we're also teaching that child, well, you're not allowed to feel your feelings. That's not safe here. I'm uncomfortable with your uncomfortability. I'm going to do anything I can to fix this. There's something even to be fixed. Right. And most of us have been trained like that for decades. And so a little bit, we have to reparent ourselves. Certainly if you have a child, that's a beautiful opportunity to reparent yourself. right? Because you get to re-heal and like go through all the steps again, but you don't have to be a parent in order to reparent yourself. Um, and I think, you know, my son is teaching me so much about just patience, giving him full permission to feel all of it. And then in turn, like the more comfortable I am with sitting with his anger and his sadness, it's like it trains me to get more comfortable with my own. And the other thing to remember is that it's not long. Like my friend Joan Rosenberg wrote a book called 90 Seconds to a Life You Love. And in it, she talks about any unpleasant sensation, which is what she calls difficult emotions. They're just unpleasant sensations. They only last for 90 seconds.
Right.
90 seconds.
Right.
Now, it might be a few waves of that, but you can do anything for 90 seconds. You can do a 90-second plank. You can feel guilt for 90 seconds. You can feel fear for 90 seconds. And then you move through to the new now. But if we constantly repress, it's going to show up as cancer. It's going to show up as whatever is going on the planet Earth right now.
Right. But I think it's the socially unacceptableness of it that I suppose you're saying then meditators are being called to go first, I suppose, because they know that they have this backlog of bliss that they're like, okay, don't worry, we've got that in the tank. As you were saying before, you meditate to be good at life. So they're dipping into the bliss every day and it's now supercharged and stored. So they feel, okay, I can go out into the world and I can really be vulnerable, even though it shouldn't be a vulnerable state, to really be in your true emotional self, to allow permission for someone else.
I do think it's vulnerable because you are opening your heart.
Sure.
Right? Like I think vulnerability is like I'm giving you the opportunity to hurt me, right? But I think it doesn't cost you as much. If you're meditating every day, it's like, well, I know I can give you everything I've got, right? Like if you were toxic and just sucking me dry, I could give you everything I've got. And it doesn't cost me that much because I know I'm just going to tap back into the source. So yes, we do have to go first because we have had the gift of getting access to this thing. And so it's like we have a responsibility to give and to share, not from a place of martyrdom though, right? Because you can only be a martyr if you have limited resources. But if you have unlimited resources, martyrdom falls away. And then the trick is like, how do I give to the people and places and things that I want to give to, where it's my choice, right? And that goes back to the 4 questions we were asking earlier. Which of these gifts do I want to use?
And so to that, I suppose people that do feel afraid to express their full selves outwardly. I heard you talking the other day about our projections and how it impacts the way that we see the world. And when I teach my students, I take them through this activity, which, you know, you heard about the observer, right? We talk about this observer where we can see that we're actually directing the film that we experience playing out in our lives. Taking you back to at the beginning when you were talking about we don't have to be in suffering, we can in fact choose. And it's actually due to our attachment to certain belief systems, as you were talking about. So when we recognize that we get to decide what we experience, how do you find that meditation, that experience or that practice is helping us rewrite the story of our lives?
Well, it depends on what type of meditation, right? Because most of the apps and the YouTube videos are teaching what I would call mindfulness, and that's very good at dealing with your stress in the now. But you know, there are other types of meditation that are actually dealing with your stress from the past and healing you on a cellular level. And now we even know on an epigenetic level. So you could be rewriting not your own story, not only your own story, which our body is really just a record of the past, of every thought we've ever thunk, of every food we've ever eaten, of every breakup we've ever been through. That stuff gets stored in our cells, like it or not. And, you know, our epigenetics are what we've inherited from previous generations. And so with this style of meditation, because you're giving your body rest that's so deep, you're actually healing yourself on a cellular and epigenetic level. So that is quite literally rewriting your history. And it's making you more happy in the now. It's up-leveling your state of consciousness in the now, which changes the lens through which you view your past. Like if you're suffering right now, chances are you're looking at your whole past of like, what went wrong? What problems should I solve? Who can I blame? What's the thing to fix? Right? But if you're very happy right now, then it's like, oh, who can I thank? What went right? What was in my favor? And so it just changes the lens through which you view the past, and that changes the past.
So then how do you reflect on the extent to which people have such negative self-talk going on? People who hate their bodies or believe that their value is in how they look, and people who are constantly criticizing and judging and being hard on themselves. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we all have it. Like, we're all human, right? Unless you're a fully enlightened being and not relevant on this plane anymore. Likely you have fear and doubt and anger and hurt and stress and trauma. But I think it's knowing that that's not you. Those stories, it's not who you are. That you're 24-hour-a-day bliss, that's your birthright. And everything else is things that you've inherited, or old stress or old trauma or old stories, and those things can shift. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is that it's a Cherokee parable. It's like a Native American Cherokee parable of a grandfather talking to his grandson. He said, I have two wolves, and one wolf, he's all about fear and competition and anger and rage. And I have another wolf that's all about love and compassion and kindness and generosity and sharing. And the little boy says, well, which wolf will win? And the grandfather says, the wolf that you feed. Mm-hmm. Right. And so if you keep feeding the fears, if you keep feeding that negative self-talk, if you keep feeding the stress, you keep feeding the negative news cycles, again, we're watering the weeds. We're putting our attention on the things that we don't want to grow. So, it's easier said than done if you don't have a meditation practice, right? Because if you are not viscerally giving yourself the experience of what it feels like to get out of fight or flight, you can't choose to be happy. You can't choose to stop stressing. That's a very real physiological phenomenon that over time actually changes not only your biochemistry, but the shape of your brain, the shape of your cells. Like, stress is not just a mental phenomenon. It does impact your actual physiology over time. Now, the beautiful news here is that once you start a meditation practice, you start to feel better energetically almost immediately. Then you start to change your neurochemistry, which is great. But over time, you also change your physiology for the better. So over time, you're not having to choose to feed the white wolf, right? You're not having to choose to feed your dreams. It's just you're changing the lens through which you perceive all of reality. And that is where you quite innocently and spontaneously want to put your attention.
Mm. So then why do you think, why is it that unless you have a meditation practice, I suppose many of us are toolless then, why then do we have such a hard time loving ourselves? Why is that almost the default state? And then we have to learn how to love ourselves.
I don't know that this is always the way. I think that this is a pretty modern phenomenon. And I think that we didn't always necessarily need meditation. Like, one, there was like ages of enlightenment where everyone was in a higher state of consciousness. Two, there are certainly civilizations now, and it has been a larger percentage of the world's population historically that has been living in accordance with nature, meaning feet on the soil, sex every day, naps every day, eating local organic food that you grew, sunshine, fresh air, physical activity, hunting, running, gathering. Think about how good you would feel. Like, that would be like a retreat now. Like, I'm outside, I've got my feet on the ground, I'm having sex, I'm cooking my food, I'm picking the food that I grew, I'm hunting, I'm running. Like, you would feel fucking amazing after just 7 days of that. Yeah. And that used to be people's whole lives. Now we're just looking at blue light screens all day, looking at these boxes all day, eating food that isn't food, over-sexualized but under-sexed, not touching soil, not growing our food, like disconnected from each other. And so it's like, of course you're gonna feel bad if you're not living in accordance with nature. Like, how would you expect to feel any differently? Mm-hmm. And so many of our like modern biohacks are really just ways to mitigate the damage of our modern lifestyles. So it's not nature that's messed up here, right? It's not the body, it's not humans that are messed up. It's just that we've stopped living in accordance with how nature designed. So then how did that happen? And the good news here is that's easy to fix.
Right. So then how did that happen though? Then why do we now struggle to trust nature? Trust our path and surrender? Why do we feel the need to control?
Well, I think that's free will, right? Like, God gave us free will, if you believe in that sort of lineage of things. But that would be more of like a Christian viewpoint of like, God gave us free will and then we get to choose what we do with it. But even if you look at that from the viewpoint of the Vedas, is that like oneness, if you want to anthropomorphize that, God, right? Which my definition of God is the collective consciousness of all that is. So the collective consciousness of all that is. And right now that's a bifurcation. There's like plants and planets and stars and dogs and cars and everything. But at one point that was like nothingness or everythingness. If you think about a black hole is not nothing. It's a mass of very dense energy. And And so at some point, if you think of that as like unity or God, like if you want to again anthropomorphize it, it's like God got bored just sitting with herself for eons and eons and eons. And so she wanted to like experience herself and rediscover herself. And so she maybe like held up a mirror or like made a twin, and she's like still bored. And so like, oh, well, maybe I'll split off and create division. And then it's like 7.4 billion different humans. But at the end of the day, it's all extensions of God. And I would argue that the reason why we're here is for the joy of rediscovery. Like the one became two for the joy of becoming one again, right? So we have to go through this separation. We have to go through this anxiety so that we can have the joy of remembering that we're God, so that we can have the joy of remembering that there is only one thing and we're all it. And so it's like the joy of falling in love or seeing great art or tasting great food. There's a deep soul recognition that we have. We're like, oh, this is part of me, right? Falling in love is like coming home to yourself, and you're witnessing like the sameness, but through the lens of separateness. And so it's all part of the play.
Right, I know. And I love that that's the way that the Vedic worldview describes everything and gives us this framework through which to understand that coming homeness. I absolutely love it. And it almost leads me to the book that you wrote, Stress Less, Accomplish More, which is the opposite of control. Okay, we want to control nature. We think we're the ones driving this ship, which is hilarious. And then you're proposing, like, let's do less and we'll get more. Do actually take your hands off the wheel and get more. And I know that also comes from, I suppose a Vedic saying, do less, accomplish more, do least, accomplish most, do nothing, accomplish everything. And that's to do with the way we approach meditation, in the Vedic meditation, which we both practice. But how can we apply that law of least effort to our lives and trust that, we can just learn how to flow and trust nature?
That I find that only really works if you are connected to source energy. Like if your channels are blocked with stress, or your antennas are not on, if you don't have a way to listen to your own intuition, or to pray or manifest or channel or whatever you want to call it, like tune your antenna to the frequency of something bigger. If you don't have that daily practice, then the surrender experiment or the doing less and accomplishing more likely is not going to pan out so well for you. Like that would just be sort of like laziness, right? Because it's going to be like nothing is going to move. But if you start to realize that surrendering does not mean giving up, that surrendering means trusting that there is something that has more information than I do, right? Then it's like, oh, then we can start to allow it to be a two-way street, 50% me, 50% nature, right? Whereas right now, most of us are trying to white knuckle it and do it all ourselves. And because by definition, we're human, like if all you're operating from is your left brain individuality, it's like having a really great laptop that's not connected to the internet. Like you might be able to type some nice letters or like maybe do some nice clip art or edit a photo or something, but you can't post it, can't look up anything. Like you're not connected to the internet. And most of us are trying to white knuckle our way through our lives without connecting to the cosmic internet. I'm just going to figure it out myself. I'm just going to do it myself. I'm just going to work harder. I'm just going to control everything. I'm going to manipulate everyone around me. And then we're like wondering why we get burned out by 40. And it's like, if you were to just, let me just plug in, let me access my right brain, which is the router that connects to collective intelligence. Let me trust, let me listen, let me surrender, let me be guided, let me see how nature wants to use me as a vessel to deliver my fulfillment versus where I need to go to fill myself up. Then everything changes.
Right. And you can't trust when your nervous system is completely saturated in stress, because like you were talking about before, when you're living earthside and you've been having all these experiences which have made you believe that you cannot trust nature, if you don't have an access to, I suppose, this source where everything is in alignment already, you're only going based on what you've seen on the outside and what you've gone through. So I suppose it's understandable that when we've gone through very real experiences of shock and trauma, and therefore we need to kind of filter all of that out first to be able to understand. Because I know when I was working in the news and I was absorbing so much stress, and my meditation practice definitely fell off the wagon. I was the worst version of myself. I used to leave work every day not liking who I was and how I conducted myself. And then you start the spiral of negative self-talk, et cetera, et cetera. And how else do you clear that out? how else do you clear out all of that day-to-day stress and all the old stuff to be able to get to that place that, you know, it's almost like I knew that there was a better version of me that I could be. And I think we all have that, right? You
We
know?
all know that. We all know it deep down because it's our original self. You know, like babies are born perfect. Kids are born perfect. We're coming out with Ziva Kids in February. And the big thing that I'm sharing to parents is this idea of like, do less, enjoy more. Do less, enjoy more. Your kids
Totally.
are already perfect. Your kids are already perfect. Like we have to get out of the
Yes.
way
Yes.
and stop putting our stress on them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's like we know there's a better version waiting for
Mm.
us.
I want to go back a bit to something you said at the very beginning about our
Mm-hmm.
vibrational attraction, I suppose, when you were talking about who we choose to interact with, what we choose to interact with, and the vibrational frequency that we're exchanging. Um, so again, also you said that everybody's doing the best with the tools that they have. So then, what's the healthy balance between being there for someone, supporting them, knowing that they're doing their best when you see that their vibrational, um, I don't know, quality might be a little bit muted or struggling, when they are draining your energy and they're not feeding you at all? How do you navigate the guilt around that? I know that,
Mm.
like, guilt, I know you've kind of just navigated this word recently, but about not being there for someone who's not on your same vibration and still being compassionate to the fact that they're doing the best that they can with the tools that they have.
So I think it's a two-way street there. Is one that if you're helping someone who doesn't want help, you're going to get punished.
Mm.
So like someone who's vibrating pretty low but isn't interested in changing that vibration, but you're like, but come up here, it's so nice up here, it's so much more fun. They're not asking for your help, right? And
Mm.
so it's like helping an alcoholic who doesn't want help, you're going to get punished. Versus if you're like, oh, I'm going to live the best life I can. I'm going to clean my own house. I'm going to get to the chair every day, twice a day. I'm going to be so successful, so much fun, so inspiring, that they start asking me questions, right? Of like,
Mm.
oh, what's your secret? How did you do that? How are you dealing with so much adversity
Mm.
with such grace? And then you inspire the worthy inquiry, right? Of like, oh, I actually think it's this meditation thing,
Mm.
right? But again, if there's no worthy inquiry, it's like, you know, nobody wants to hear about your vegan or CrossFit routine because they're sort of infamous for like, I'm vegan, I'm CrossFit. Like they're not waiting for worthy inquiry to talk about it, so they get a bad rap. And so I'm very, very conscientious when people graduate from Ziva that I'm like, we don't have to be evangelical about this, right? It's like you clean your own house, you start vibrating as high as you can, and then people will start to ask you, right?
Mm.
And then it'll be more genuine.
Mm.
So that's it. That's one piece of it. And the other piece of it is that there might be someone in your life that's maybe nuclear family, or that you feel some sort of like, I guess I want to say obligation to help. And I think that we want to be careful with that obligation, because if you're giving a gift that you don't want to give, it's not a gift, right? Like I don't want someone helping me out of obligation.
Mm.
If
Mhm.
someone helps me, I want them to want to help me.
Mhm.
I don't want to feel like I owe you anything.
Mhm.
And so if you're well, you know, I don't really want to help my friend move, but I'm going to because I'm a good person. Or I don't really want to help my sister, but I'm going to because I feel obligated. It's not a gift, right? You're actually creating more of a karmic debt. And you don't get to choose where that person rebalances things. So I think it's like help where and when and how feels charming to you and feels inspiring to you. And that even the act of helping itself is reciprocal, that you are energized by the giving,
Right.
right? So we get out of the tit for tat thing. And then
Right.
there's sometimes where people, like, you might want to decrease the frequency and duration of your contact with people, and that's okay. You know, we don't have to be in anyone's lives for longer than we want to be.
Mhm. Yeah, because I think that's something that I have struggled with in terms of, you know, especially as a meditator, you feel like, okay, well, I have more resource than this person. So therefore, it's not about telling them what they should do, just literally being there to hold space over and over and over and over and over and over again. And then you start to see that that really is kind of like just going to be this long journey that's really a drain rather than feeding. But you feel, I love this person, I am compassionate to them, I actually do want their happiness. But you can start to see that, like, there is a fatigue. So what do you say to that?
Yeah. Well, I think in that case, if you're holding space over and over and over and over and over again and nothing's changing,
Mm,
then you actually are then watering their weeds,
right. Hmm.
right? You're putting your attention on something that they clearly don't want to shift or are not ready to shift. And so I would recommend that you start watering the flowers. You start putting your attention on the things that you want to grow.
Yeah.
And that could be a different aspect of them. If there's anything you can find about that person that's going right, that's going well, that you can affirm, that you can lift up, then do that. Or, let's go work out together. Instead of sitting and holding space, let's
Yeah.
go get acupuncture together. Let's go get
Yeah.
massages. Let's go
Yeah.
for a hike.
Yeah.
Let's start a garden. Like
Mm,
anything that's creative so
yeah.
that you can speak to the highest part of them.
Mm,
But then, eventually, if it's happening over and over and over again and it feels like a drain, it doesn't feel reciprocal, nothing's changing in them, then you're putting your attention on the thing that you don't want to
yeah.
grow, and it would be best for you to remove your attention from that.
Totally. And I'll tell you my experience with it. I wanted just to get your take on it. That yeah, I've started to do that, to focus on the what can we water, and again, no shift. And then I did what I had never done before, which was a very new step for me, which was actually to step back, which I was afraid that if I stepped back, oh, were they going to fall? And it was amazing what happened. They lifted, because they saw that, oh, okay, well, if they're not going to be there for me in that capacity, and they wanted me to be there
Mm-hmm.
in some capacity, they would have to start changing things. So that was also a really interesting kind of experiment that worked out well in the end. So
Yay,
yeah,
good for
yeah,
you. Way
yeah.
to
But I wanted
practice
to get
it.
your insight, because it was a sticky one for me. And before I let you go, because I know you have so many things to do, and I feel so grateful that you've given me this time, considering everything that's going on for you. Um, I have to come back to the idea of the fact that so many people talk about meditating. I want to meditate, but I can't. And then even the ones that do don't stick to it. What is it that you can say to people that might have learnt, I say you might have learnt, the best workout ever for six pack abs or whatever. But if you don't practice and you don't go to the gym, you're not going to get those six pack abs. Still, it's kind of like, yeah. So I suppose, like, you know, how do you, I suppose, release your meditators into the wild with this sense of, like, you know, wanting them to get the benefits of it, and knowing that so many people just fall off the wagon?
It's a really good question. And I'd say, to the first point of the reason why most people don't start is the time issue. They think they don't have time. And that's usually because they haven't been trained yet, or they're trying to do a technique that was made for a monk and not for them. But once you have a technique that's made for you, and once you did get some training, then you start to see the return on time investment. And as far as like people starting and falling off the wagon, like this is exactly why I created the Ziva technique. Because I realized that too many people were either not starting or falling off the wagon. And I was like, I do not get this. Like, how
Mm,
on earth could you get the keys to the kingdom and then put them down? Like, it was mind boggling to me. And so I had been teaching for maybe like 5 or 6 years at this point. I was just teaching meditation, and I just started doing deep dives of researching and asking deeper questions. And what I started to realize was a few fold. One, that when people who are meditating then say, well, I don't have time to meditate, what's usually right underneath that is they're actually afraid of feeling their feelings. And because meditation is so powerful and can be such a cathartic physical and emotional release, it's like we have to, again, it comes back to feeling your feelings. We've been trained our whole lives not to feel our feelings. And then the meditation makes that non-negotiable, right? The meditation starts wringing you out. And so people are like, oh, I have to clean the toilet. I have to walk the dog. I have to do anything other than sit with myself and feel this. And so that's why we created the Ziva technique, which is mindfulness, meditation, and manifesting. And so I find that the whole really is greater than the sum of its parts. And I help people to use the mindfulness both as a runway into the meditation, and then also as a way to deal with the intensity of the unstressing or the emotional
mm,
catharsis that can happen. And I spend a lot of time warning people about it when they move through my trainings, and so that people are very intellectually prepared, and then they're viscerally equipped to handle it. And we found that the adoption rate is much higher. The commitment rate is much higher. And then because I tend to work with high achievers and high performers, the manifesting piece is really attractive, because then you're using all of this time of the meditation and then hitching it to the engine of your dreams, right? You're like, oh, yes, I just wasted my time, which everyone thinks of meditation is like a waste of time. Sure, I wasted my time for 15 minutes of meditation, but now I can put that towards my dream of like the $1 million that I want to make, or whatever, sort of
mm-hmm,
small self
mm-hmm,
dream we have.
mm-hmm. It's unbelievable. I mean, I just am in such awe of your work. You have really, really, I really think that it's such an incredible gift that you're giving to the world. And you've given me such a gift of having this conversation. And for all the people that are going to hear it, it was such a perfect way to reunite.
Yeah,
Thank you
perfect.
so much. And sending so many healing vibes to your mother. I'm so sorry about that.
Thank you. Yeah, we can all just picture her in perfect health and
Yes,
brighter and shinier and healthier than ever.
absolutely. Em, thank you so much. You're a gift.
Yeah, my pleasure.